The morning slipped into the mountains like a shy guest. Mist drew white scarves across the shoulders of the valley, and the oranges on the slope behind the house brightened from dull green to a hushed, glowing gold. In the yard, a dog stretched, back arched, tail a metronome. Smoke found its rhythm at the lip of the stove. In the kitchen, Tieu sat at the low table with a quilt thrown across her lap. She had not yet regained the weight she lost the day her daughter arrived 2 months early, but there was a new fullness in her cheeks that came from determination more than food. The steam from the pot fogged her vision. Across the table, Hung, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled, leaned over a clay pot and tested the broth with a spoon. "Ribs with green papaya," he said, tasting, nodding. "Hot, and sweet enough. You'll eat while it's warm." Tieu smiled without arguing. She wasn't always hungry, but she'd learned that hunger and healing do not consult each other. The baby was 200 kilometers away in the neonatal ward at Tieu Obstetrics and Pediatrics Hospital, a city of beeps and careful hands and fluorescent dawn. Milk had become more than food. It was proof she could reach the child with her own body across the distance. "Did you sleep?" Hung asked, ladling soup into a deep bowl. "Enough," she lied. "Where's Han?" "Asleep," he grinned. "Our little general went to war with bedtime and lost." He set the bowl in front of her, added rice, and then a small plate of braised pork. "Eat the papaya," he said, half stern, half teasing. "It's medicine, and it listens to mothers." She ate, obedient, spooning broth and rice and pieces of papaya that had softened until they nearly dissolved. Outside, the first racket of the day started. A rooster with poor timing, the clack of a neighbor's gate, a motorbike coughing to life on the road. The dog thumped its tail twice, once for each noise. Hung poured tea and glanced at his phone. "Tuan messaged," he said. "They've started cutting 1.3-meter boards at the mill. Overseas buyers prefer them. We'll need to tell our people to switch, and I promised I'd send a truck to your place to finish the planks for the canopy." "Always one more thing," she said, but there was affection in it. On the hillside, the oranges were near perfect, bright coins in a currency the weather printed and devalued at will. In the lowlands, the mill swallowed logs and returned planks, measuring everything in centimeters and labor. Life hovered between those two slopes, the one with fruit and the one that turned forests into floors. Hung walked both. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number, and the breakfast shrank to a thin line inside her throat. He answered. "Hello?" "Yes, I hear you." His face changed, not with fear, but with attention. "How is she?" He listened. He nodded, twice, then smiled. He covered the mouthpiece and mouthed, "Good." When he ended the call, he did not speak at once. He needed to put the relief somewhere before it spilled. "The nurse," he said finally. "She's eating 30 to 40 milliliters per feed now. Weight's up, from 1.6 to 1.8 kilograms. Heart and breathing sound good. They need more milk today or tomorrow." Tieu put her hand to her mouth the way people do when they're not sure whether they might cry. Relief was not a straight line. It zigzagged and doubled back. "Today," she said. "We go today." "You just bled the world for that child," he said gently. "You should rest a few days, then we'll—" "Today," she said again, and her voice had that small iron he recognized. "Bring the cooler." "I have enough for now." She made a face. "Not as much as I'd like, but enough to feel like a door left open." He didn't argue after that. When a woman builds a bridge between her body and a far cradle, a man learns to carry the boards. He cleaned the bowl, he swept the floor, he measured the day with chores until it made a shape that looked like care. When he tried to take the empty bowl, she stopped him to scoop the last cubes of papaya, swallowing them with the concentration of prayer. "After I shower, I'll pump again," she said. "If Han wakes, heat the porridge in the small pot." "I already made it," he said. "And I'll message my aunt, she used to be a nurse, to watch Han while we drive. 200 kilometers is not kind to small stomachs." She leaned back, touched the quilt's hem, and closed her eyes for a moment. Exhaustion had different sizes. The physical kind that made limbs heavy, and the other kind, shaped like worry, that pooled behind the eyes. When she opened them, the room had not changed. That counted as hope. The mill at the edge of town wore its sawdust like a fat snowfall. The roofline bent from old storms. The trucks were a chorus of misfiring lungs. Lin, a wiry man with a reliable grin, met Hung by the gate with a clipboard and a list of small fires that had been put out or else had learned to smolder without complaint. "Price is still high," Lin said, offering tea from a chipped cup. "Other mills pay more for raw logs. We can't match. But we can outlast. And the boards?" "Most shops still cut 1 meter," Lin said. "We've shifted to 1.3. It makes the export buyers nod." He flicked a page with his pen. "Also, your order for the canopy at her place, the boards are ready. I'll have them delivered this afternoon." Hung exhaled gratitude he didn't have words for. "Tell the crew I'll be gone a day or 2. If anything dies, bury it. If anything lives, keep it fed. If money asks to be counted, count it twice." Lin grinned. "Boss, go do the real work. We can manage the saws back at the house." Han stood in the yard in pajamas, hair wild, socks mismatched, singing to the dog as if that would convince it to stop chasing its own tail. She brightened when she saw her mother, then dimmed a little at the sight of the cooler on the table. "Are you going far?" "Far enough to help your sister," Tieu said, smoothing stray hair behind Han's ear. "We'll be back in 2 sleeps. You'll stay with Great Aunt. She knows all the best stories. She used to be a superhero in a hospital." "Does the hospital have capes?" "Aprons," Tieu said. "But the work is the same." Han nodded. "I will be brave," she said, which meant she would cry later where only the dog could hear, and then she would be fine. She had learned that bravery is sometimes just obeying the clock. Hung packed with a quiet efficiency learned from years of moving grain before rain. Cooler, bottles, ice packs, 2 changes of clothes, a small bag for groceries, the thermos, the folders with receipts and numbers and phone numbers that wrote themselves across his calendar. He moved through rooms and lists and found himself suddenly in front of Tieu as she strapped on sandals with the stubbornness of an injured champion. He knelt and took her ankle in his hand. "Are you dizzy?" "A little," she said truthfully. He looked at her, at the iron in her voice and the thinness in her wrists, and he kissed the arch of her foot the way you kiss the forehead of a sleeping child. "I'll drive slow," he said. "You always do," she said, with a smile that had learned to forgive the world. The first hour was hills. The second hour was hills pretending to be a plain. Then the road lost interest in geography and became only a sequence of choices. This lane or that, pass now or wait, stop for tea or press on with a mouthful of breath. They didn't speak much. The silence was full and not empty. Now and then Hung said, "You okay?" And she said, And he watched the color in her cheeks like a man watching clouds for rain. The hospital lifted from the city like a box of light. Inside, the air had the stubborn chill of places where fear and hope are stored in large quantities. Nurses moved quickly without seeming to run. Every door led to a smaller room with more beeps. They sanitized their hands the way worshippers wash at a font. The baby was swaddled in hospital white, a knot of human and machine. The feeding chart, clipped to the crib, had neat columns of numbers that meant the difference between staying and going home. 30 milliliters, 35, 40. Sometimes the numbers trembled, then stood up again. Tieu stared. Hunger improved, fatigue lifted, and something steadier took their place. The nurse knew the look. "She is strong," the nurse said, "and greedy, which is good." She'll tell us when she wants to leave. They turned the day into errands, deliver bottles, check volumes, walk outside for air when the air inside turned heavy with the exhalations of other people's prayers. In the afternoon, Hung found a small hotel near the hospital, one of those kindly places that know how to charge friends like family. He carried in the cooler and the bag. He went out again for rice and a mess of vegetables, and when he returned, he put another pot on the loner hot plate, the night's second round of ribs with papaya, the old recipe that turned papaya and bone into a bright, milky broth that seemed to strengthen everyone it touched. "Eat," he told her. "It's how we win." She ate. The bed in the small room had the generosity of clean sheets and a window that pointed at a tree. After dinner, she washed and pumped again, the small machine humming like a patient friend. When she finished, she lay back and stared at the ceiling, which had been painted a hopeful white a long time ago. She did not cry. She closed her eyes and replaced crying with breath. Hung watched her. He loved her in two registers, companion and comrade. The first was soft, the second hard. He had learned that love needs both. The next morning returned them to the hospital with fresh bottles. Nurses smiled. The weight chart moved a fraction. Hung filed a promise in his chest and marked it paid. By noon, they were on the road home. 80 kilometers in, the world narrowed into a tunnel of trees and motorbikes and trucks with sudden ideas. They spoke more on the way back. Talk of nothing and everything, of when to harvest the small patch of ginger behind the kitchen, of who needed visiting, of the roof that might not survive another shameless rain. She mentioned, almost casually, that she had pumped less overnight than she'd hoped. "You're making a bridge," he said. "Some planks take longer to shape." They reached the house near dusk. Lamps in the valley bloomed like small flowers with good manners. Great Aunt had put Han down for a nap, but neither of them had honored the contract. The child hurled herself at her mother and then, embarrassed, pretended the hug was for the dog. After tea and quick bowls of rice, Hung went outside to move the truck deeper into the yard before the night put its hand down. The wind carried whispers, not of gossip, but of futures, some kind, some not. He did not expect Khan. The man was seated on the front step, elbows on knees, eyes raw from a kind of thinking that had no exit. He stood when he saw them, then remembered something and sat again. He was thinner than Hung remembered, older too, in that way men get when they have argued for a long time with themselves and lost. "What are you doing here?" Hung's voice was flat. He did not bother to hide the protective shift of his body. Khan looked down. "I don't know," he said. Then, "I do. I came to see..." He stopped, jaw clenched. "I came to see the house. The one you built for her. I wanted to see where my children come home." They stood like that, all three of them, in a triangle of history with the edges still sharp. The mountain had held worse standoffs, men and weather, men and hunger, but this one had none of the clean sorrow that accompanies storms. This one smelled of regret and old ash. Tuka stepped forward. She did not step closer. "You can't be here like this," she said quietly. "Not without calling. Not at my door. Not after everything." His eyes met hers then, and the boy who had once made her laugh was still in there somewhere. But over him, a man had been built from choices cemented by the weight of consequence. "I made a ruin," he said. I know I did. But the children have a home," she said, precise as a ledger. He looked at Hung, at the truck, at the boards stacked under the tarp near the shed, the ones cut to 1.3 meters, destined to become a canopy that would keep rain off the windows. "You'll take everything," he said, but it was not accusation, only fatigue putting on bravado like a bad coat. Hung's answer was simple. What there is here, we make with our hands. Nothing has been taken from you except what you threw away. Khan shrugged, a collapse more than a gesture. Perhaps I came to take something back, he said. A child, maybe. He half laughed, a sound without a country. I told myself I wouldn't leave with my hands empty. The dog, polite until then, made a sound that meant the conversation had reached the limit of its patience. The human heart is a muscle, but other muscles can be persuasive. Tieu's voice, when it came, was not angry. It had the authority of someone who has lived with pain long enough to know how to seat it. If you want to be a father, she said, be one. Show up with gentleness. Show up when you are useful. Show up when no one claps. But do not come to my door like a thief planning to steal a person. We are not furniture. Khan nodded, once, twice. He did not apologize. Nothing he could say would revive what had died. He stepped away from the step. I will call, he said, and even he knew how small that sounded. Then he left, taking his shadow with him. Hung stood very still, listening for the shape of the night. He had the sudden, unhelpful memory of being 12 and discovering that a neighbor's cow had wandered near the ravine and that simply wanting it to return was not enough. Men often wanted the easy thing, to declare and obtain. Fathers learned if they were worth anything to ask and earn. They slept poorly, and then the morning made them get up anyway. It had that power over everyone. Days learned to behave again. The canopy boards arrived. The crew set them on sawhorses and planed them until the wood revealed a quiet shine. Hung stood with Lin and marked a line where the crossbeam would sit. They worked steady, without haste. Haste is the enemy of permanence. At the hospital, nurse updates arrived like weather reports. 1.8 kilograms became 1.9. The intake chart crept higher by milliliters that felt like meters. Once, the doctor called to say the baby had slept without alarms for 4 straight hours, and everyone in the house smiled without planning to. Inside the kitchen, Tieu turned meals into medicine. Soup and rice and greens, papaya and ribs, ginger shaved thin into congee. She rested because rest was part of the job. She pumped not as a measure of worth, but as a way of keeping the promise her body had already made without asking her. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a person she recognized and didn't, a face softened by milk and longing, a mouth set with the discipline of survival. She did not miss the world outside the door. She missed one small human in one small crib and decided to let the rest of the world wait. Twice Khan called. Once he hung up when Hung answered. Once he spoke to Tieu and asked, in that way men ask when they have not yet learned not to ask, if she needed money. She said no, not to punish him, but because the question had been asked too late to be useful and because there are kinds of help that can only be given by hands, not wallets. On Friday, Hung drove to the mill early, cut through numbers and orders, and left Lin with a tighter list than usual. We're going to the hospital, he said. They say maybe a week more. 2 if she decides to make us wait. Lin clapped his shoulder and said what good men say when the work and the heart pull in the same direction. Go. Storms in the mountains are not metaphors. They are schedules. This one arrived at dusk with a lowercase roar that fattened into capital letters. Rain found the easy paths first and then invented new ones. The new canopy took its first test and passed. Rain hit the new slope of roof and slid off like a bad idea reconsidered. Inside, the drip that used to polka dot the floor in front of the window did not appear. Those are the victories that never make it into songs but can change the way a night feels. They ate with the storm talking on the roof. Han was pleased with the rain until it made a sound that reminded her of a dream she had not enjoyed. Then she crawled under the table and camped there like a small, determined hedgehog. Ben, the carved wooden truck, lived on the shelf above the rice jar. He watched without comment. After dinner, Hung opened the ledger he kept for the mill and marked down numbers with a care born of necessity. Board sold, payments due, fuel bought, a coil of wire for the fence around the small plot of ginger. He flipped to another page, the private one, and wrote smaller. NICU milk, delivered. Weight, 1.9 kilograms. Canopy, finished. Khan, called, spoke without shouting. He closed the book and felt the soft thrill of having told the truth to himself. It came on a Tuesday afternoon when the air had the patient smell of drying laundry and boiled rice. The nurse's voice sounded different, a little higher, like a woman who'd decided now was the moment for good news. "She is ready," the nurse said. "Not today, but soon, 2 days, if she keeps eating like a champion. Her numbers sing. You can bring the car seat." Tieu did not sit. She stood in the doorway with the phone pressed to her ear and cried in a way that frightened the dog and made Han stand still and not speak, because sometimes the best way to be brave is to watch and wait. When she could talk again, she called Hung. There was a pause while the news traveled to the part of him that kept the books and the schedule and recalculated both with a joy that made arithmetic temporarily unnecessary. He came home early. They looked at the house as if it had become bigger than it had been that morning. He brought the car seat down from the high shelf where Hope keeps such items until they are not dangerous to look at. He set it on the kitchen floor and Han put her doll in it and buckled the straps with the intense seriousness of a surgeon. "We'll drive at dawn," he said. "The road is kinder before the day remembers its temper." They packed with the delicate panic of people preparing for joy. Milk first, extra blankets, the softest hat, the tiny shirt with the rabbit, a list of questions for the nurse that seemed too large to fit in one mouth. Tieu slept with her hand on the cooler. Hung slept in fits and starts, counting kilometers the way other men count sheep. At dawn, the mountain let them go without argument. The hospital released the baby into a world that had been preparing for her arrival for months. The nurse showed them how to buckle and unbuckle, how to keep the head from tipping, how to listen for a breath that decided to hide and coax it back with a finger. They walked to the car like people carrying a religious relic. In the back seat, Han leaned forward and whispered, "I will teach you the dog's name." The road home was the same road. The tires felt the same stones. The tea shop at the ridge still sold biscuits that tasted like sawdust and comfort. But the angles had changed. They drove through the same weather and none of the same thoughts. They did not speak much. The silence had become a room they both liked. At the house, Great Aunt cried, then pretended she'd only gotten suds in her eyes from washing. The dog presented a stick, and then, recognizing the situation, set it down with the dignity such moments require. The baby, indifferent, slept. Inside, the canopy kept its promise, and the kitchen smelled of papaya and ribs because some rituals are better in duplicate. Hung set the car seat on the table and then, remembering 1,000 grandmothers, moved it to a chair. Tieu sat nearby and touched the baby's foot with one finger as if identifying a rare bird. They ate. After, when Han had fallen asleep on the mat in the living room and the baby had arranged her breath into a regular agreement with the air, Tieu and Hung sat with their tea and the ledger and the future. "What now?" he asked, though he didn't need the answer to be complete. "Now we do the small things," she said, "and the big things if they come. We keep the roof honest. We keep the milk cold. We keep the dog from explaining philosophy to the baby." He laughed. "And the mill? We sell boards to people who promise to pay and then remind them of their promise until it becomes their idea." He opened the ledger to the private page and wrote, "Home." The word looked both too small and exactly right. On Thursday, Khan called again. He did not speak long. He asked if there was anything he could bring that wouldn't get in the way. She told him yes, diapers, size small, and patience. He came on Saturday afternoon with both. He stood at the edge of the yard and let the dog smell his hands and then the air, and he did not cross the threshold until he was asked. He did not ask to take anything away. He stayed 10 minutes. It was exactly the right length of time for a man rebuilding a bridge he had once burned. The orchard behind the house took the weather's news and made sugar of it. The oranges hung heavier, then lighter, then gone. The slope held. The canopy smiled at rain and shrugged. The mill paid its workers and learned to tell a long story to debt until debt fell asleep. At the dinner table, bowls steamed, and the baby made the sounds babies make when they are composing their first opinions of soup. There would be other storms. Prices would fall in love with the wrong direction. Health would forget itself and have to be reminded. But the house had learned its trick. It knew how to hold people. The book on the shelf thickened with entries that looked ordinary and were not. Milk delivered, weight gain, roof repair. A call returned. A sorry offered without being named. In the end, the long road that began with a phone call and a pot of papaya soup did not end at the hospital or the mill or the new canopy. It ended here and then kept walking, into mornings with tea and laughter, into evenings with rice and the dog's hopeful stick, into the unremarkable miracles of a family that had learned the size of enough. On the first night the baby slept 3 hours in a row, Tieu woke before she did and listened to the house breathing. Man, girl, infant, dog, all of them in their different tempos, all of them agreeing. She got up, walked to the window and looked out at the yard where the boards for the next project lay stacked like sentences waiting to be written. Behind the yard, the oranges were dark coins in the half moon. In the distance, the road was a thought the mountain allowed. She put her hand to the glass and felt the night's cool steady her. And when she turned back, the baby stirred, opened her mouth, and announced a small, hungry revolution. Tieu smiled, reached for the lamp, and began again.